because it's in a different scope.
No, down above it works.
No, that's probably right. Yeah, I think it's because I have this controller. Yeah, it's because I have this. It's because I have this.
Values are different, right?
I have this controller and it's taking over. Oops. No.
No, I
No,
think
that's a
it's
good
because
question.
of the
I don't know.
Isolated scope. I think it's because of the isolated scope that those two.
I think replace to is replace the element itself.
Say what?
To replace the element itself.
Replace the element itself.
Yeah.
If you make this
I'll
text
just show
value not
something.
not a variable but sort of an object, then the text value inside.
Yeah.
Oh,
If
yeah.
you saw it flash up there for a second, so that was with replace as true. If we do replace false,
Now it shows up.
actually it doesn't matter because anything inside of this div is going to get wiped out no matter what.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
the replace changes. If I say don't replace it, then it's going to stick the code in here. And this div editable text is still going to remain. If I say replace true, it's going to get rid of this and inject in this place my template. So that was good. Thank you. I learned something on that. Okay, so just one more quick example here. So this is just another example of sort of multi-layered directives. If you wanted to build like a keyboard, for instance, I have a simple unordered list. I have a couple styles up here. And I have list items, and I have ng repeat, which is another directive that you'll use over and over and over and over and over. That's how you take an array of data and then spit it all out into a list. So I'm saying for every key in the keys, which is from my controller, I have this piano key custom attribute or custom directive, and I'm passing in a note variable and a note attribute and an on-press attribute, and then I'm passing in variables from here. Does everybody know what ng repeat is?
Mhm.
Everybody uses that quite often? Okay. So essentially my point of this one was that you can use directives over and over and over and over again, especially in ng repeats. You're going to use them quite a bit. So you want to add specific functionality to something that you're repeating over and over. So, and they all have their own sort of variables passed into them. So my controller function, I just set up my keys, storing what the last pressed one was, and then I have a function for key pressed. My directive is just as simple. I'm returning a linking function. Again, I could just return a function if I wanted to. And then for the element, which is actually the list item, because I'm running the ng repeat on the I'm running the ng repeat on the list item. So the element is the list item. And just binding a mouse down event. And then I passed in the onPress function, or onPress attribute, and I'm saying I want to use the key pressed function from the controller scope. I'm going to pass in key note variable. So scope apply attributes onPress. Whatever the onPress value is, it's going to fire that up on the scope up here, or just key pressed. So that's a pretty simple one. But you're going to be using your directives inside of repeaters quite often. So, and going back to that previous example, the more complex one, it had its own controller scope. You might want to try to think of an example where you do something like that, but you would. I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but you might want to repeat something and then have functionality specific to each one of those repeated elements. So you could use your own controller scope. Totally replace the template again if you wanted to, etc. Any questions on that one? Okay, so now I'll just show you a quick example of, this is an app that I've been working on, and it uses a lot of the directives that we just saw. I'll just kind of point them at you as I go through here. I have an autofocus directive, which focuses the first input right here. I actually have the directive is on this text input, just autofocus, and then I just return a function and then say element focus. That's it. Quite simple. Here I have my enter submit function. So I'm just going to hit enter and it's going to submit the form, my basic login form. Let me go ahead. There's nothing fancy on this page. Okay, this page here is full of tons of directives. Right here I have a Twitter pop-up directive that gives you a little tooltip when you focus in on that particular text input.
Can I ask real quick, is that the only way to use the Twitter bootstrap functions, is to make a directive with Angular? Or can you can't just put that attribute right on the element? Like you
It doesn't work that way because you can for the initial page load, it'll work.
Okay.
But when you start loading and doing, hashbang URLs and things like that,
Right.
Twitter doesn't know, the JavaScript function for Twitter doesn't know that a page load event happens, so it doesn't bind anymore.
So compiling a list of a bunch of commonly used directives is a good way to create a library. Like Angular
Absolutely.
UI is basically a set of directives. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and Angular UI, I think they kind of have like a sub-branch that does all the Twitter bindings
Yeah.
for you and things. Yeah, exactly.
I got a question.
Yes.
When you logged in, was it a new page load, or were you basically still on the same page?
No, I'm
Just-
still on the same page the whole time. Yeah. And like I was talking earlier, using the service, I have an auth service. So the login actually, as soon as you submit the login form, it hits, it's using a node backend. It authorizes you or not, and then if you are authorized, then it tells the auth service, hey, this is the user that's logged in. Go ahead and let him start browsing around and load up the new UI. Otherwise, if you, like for instance, if you were logged out and you tried to deep link to this, it'll kick you back out to the login page because the auth service says, no, I don't have a user. And because it's a service and it's persistent throughout the entire app lifecycle, that's the singleton nature of it. So these sides here, you'll notice I changed the color here, and it's actually changing the colors of the sides. Here I have a lot of uploads in this application, so I created a directive to, I can type in a URL here, or I can upload a file. Oh, I'm not connected to the internet. That would be a problem. Well, anyway, it sends it off to the node backend, and then it posts it on the CDN, and then it replies back and says, okay, here's the URL on the CDN of the file that you just uploaded. So I'm changing model attributes here, and it's changing the actual layout of the page essentially, using data binding and custom directives. So let's say I want to, just to give you a quick background, this is a tool to allow you to create custom advertisements essentially. So you can upload your pictures on the side, like you have side skins, you have top skin, you can create rising stars, banner ads, all different types of banners. And we wanted to allow people to write custom HTML code, either in the sides or the top or wherever they wanted to. So I'm going to go ahead and you'll notice as I'm typing this, you probably can't really see it on that monitor. Let me do something quick. Okay. So up here, I have a custom iframe directive, which is anytime I change this text input, I change the value, I essentially wipe out the iframe that's up here, draw a new one built to the dimensions that I input, set the background color to this color, and then I inject this HTML code into that iframe. So that happens every time I do a keystroke. So you see as I'm typing, it's actually changing the code up there. And this is inside of an iframe. It's not really going to work because it's using an about blank page. But so that's a custom directive there. Unfortunately, the internet's not working. But if I uploaded images to the sides of this, I can turn resizing on. And whenever you resize your browser, the images on the side resize. And that's a totally another custom directive that applies a lot of kind of funky math to calculate the dimensions of what it's supposed to do. This is actually, I have all of my directives for that app in one file. And this is essentially all of them. So here's my autofocus that I had on the login form, which is very simple. Just returning a function, focusing on the element. Here's my enter submit function from earlier. Username input doesn't allow you to, so when you're filling out your form and you're adding a new user, you can, I'm only letting them type letters and numbers basically. Here's a basic input directive, which says, it basically writes a new template where you pass in a label. It creates a label and a text input together. So rather than having to manually every single time type a label and type an input, you just pass in the values that you want. I want my label to say this, and I want my model, my text input to be this. So it's kind of like code consolidation. Here's my HTML iframe directive, which is the one I was showing you where you're typing and it replaces the iframe dynamically. What I'm doing here is I'm observing. In your controllers, there's a thing called scope watch, scope $watch, which will do something, run some sort of function anytime a particular attribute in your scope changes. Directives, you use attributes observe rather than watch. So what I'm saying is, anytime the model attribute changes, run this function right here. So to go back to this, anytime I change the model and I start typing something, it's essentially firing off that function that I told it to do. Here, let me skip that one. That was pretty long and ridiculous. Okay, here's the uploadable URL, the one that I was showing you where you can, type in a text input to a URL, to a file, where you can upload it. So here I have on my scope, I'm actually doing a couple different things. I have my model, which is a bidirectional binding, and then I have accepted file types, these other kind of attributes here that I just want to interpret it as strings. Here I'm using a custom template. And then on this one I'm using a compile function, which is similar to a linking function. The post compile function is essentially a linking function. I actually could probably put it in there. But this is what I was saying before, there's many different ways to build your directives. You can use a linking function, you can use the controller, and you can use a compile function. Excuse me a second. So this one's pretty hefty here. I'm actually using jQuery in here, and I'm binding a lot of different things. I have this. I'm using a plugin. I don't remember the actual name of it. It's some kind of jQuery file uploading plugin. So here I'm passing in all the attributes. What happens when there's progress on the upload? What happens when it's done? That's sort of a standard jQuery plugin initialization. But again, that has to happen inside of the directive, like you were asking. That's a good example of using a jQuery plugin and binding it that way. Pop over, this is the Twitter thing right here. That's that. Hex color. This is a directive to change the little box to the right as you type in the color. This is a slightly older version of the app, but I also added another jQuery plugin where when you click this little box, it launches a color picker. But you see that I'm using